Hello, my name is Benson George. In this video, we're going to talk about how to design a system to develop, test, and deploy code for web projects. Having a consistent process to deploy and test code can save you a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of headaches in the long run. It may initially take you a few days to get set up, but you don't even want to start thinking about starting a new web development project nowadays without having a very good deployment process set up for your team. Now there's many ways that you can set this up, but the one that I want to talk to you about should be able to get you started and get you running in no time. Now before we start, I need to tell you that this video is geared more for people that want to understand the big concepts and the big ideas behind deploying and building code, right? It's not so much a detail-oriented video, it's more about the design aspect of it, not really the building. If you want to understand more of the implementation details, you want to take a look at some of my other videos on DevOps that I will leave in the video details as they become available. First, let's talk about some basic concepts about these environments. Each environment is set up to perform a very unique function in the software development process. Now for our design, we will have a server for each of our environments. When you group together multiple servers for the purpose of deploying code, you have what's known as a deployment workflow. As you move through each environment towards the live server, your code should become increasingly more stable. Now turning back to our design, let's call the first one our development environment. The second server we'll call our staging environment. And the third server we'll call our production or live environment. Now we're going to talk about these servers in more detail. The development environment is an area devs are constantly pushing to in order to test their particular feature that they're building. Devs use this environment as a sandbox, and they also may be doing work on the server that's in collaboration with other developers. Now you have to treat this environment as very unstable. Server outages in this environment shouldn't be the biggest cause of concern. What should be important is that you keep this environment usable for the developers at all times. Now, developers should usually deploy code in this environment via FTP or some sort of similar manual method like this. I'll cover the details of how exactly to build this out in other videos. The specs for this dev environment can also be very minimal. You can get away with having 1 or 2 processors and 4 or 8 gigs of memory if you're hosting one project at a time. You can also place all of your main services in the same in the same physical machine as well. By services, I mean your database server, your web server, your caching engine, and all that. Let's talk about the staging environment next. The purpose of a staging environment is twofold. Number one, it's to provide a stable area for developers to push changes that stakeholders can review and approve. These stakeholders can be members of the project management team or the business analysis team that requested these changes in the first place. Number two is to run tests against your old code. It's to run tests against your new code. It's what's known as regression testing, and these regression tests will make sure that your new code does not negatively impact the existing code base. Now you want to make sure that as you're moving through these environments, that your staging environment at all times is more stable than the dev environment. So your staging environment should rarely, if ever, break. And the primary way that you manage that stability is to deploy code using not FTP, but a version control system with Git. And what Git allows you to do is it allows you to automatically merge in new code that you're building with your development team's code, with the rest of your dev team's code, so that there are no conflicts. So unlike FTP, where you're destroying whatever was existing, using Git allows you to merge all of that in together so that Git takes care of any conflicts for you. Now, as far as the specs of the staging environment, you want to make sure that it mimics the production environment very closely. So the reason for this is when you're running these stress tests and regression tests, you want to make sure that you've got a very similar environment so that if you're running under a load of 10,000 users, if you're trying to simulate 10,000 users per second, you really want to have a good handle of how a production environment would respond to that kind of scenario. Finally, let's talk about the production environment. Now, the production environment is the finish line for your code. Before you think about deploying to production, you should have received stakeholder approval. That's number one. So in terms of deploying code to the staging and production environments, definitely, again, you have to make sure that you deploy code only through some sort of VCS system, some sort of version control system. Here, Git is amazing for that. So I would definitely recommend Git or even Bazaar, Mercurial, they're all out there. So go check those out. So let's bring this all together in a simple example. So a developer wants to start working on a new feature or an issue on the development server, right? Once you feel like you have a good solution, or once the developer rather feels that they have a good solution, they will have to push it to the QA server, but they're going to be using Git for that, right? So once they push to the staging environment via Git, they're going to inform the stakeholder team, whether that be project managers or external reviewers. So the dev team is going to alert the QA or the project management team. So once stakeholder approval has been verified and has been given, then the development team goes ahead and pushes to the production environment via Git again. Let's look at another example now. For many projects, you would be fine with the first example, but depending upon the amount of traffic your web project gets, you will outgrow the setup very fast. For example, you may want to have a dedicated server for your databases and web app servers. So you can load balance certain parts of your live infrastructure like your web servers to handle more load to your live site. In the end, you will see many different flavors of this, but the biggest takeaway that you need to understand is that each environment serves a unique and specific purpose, and you can also configure them in many different ways to suit your specific needs. How we actually start building out the nuts and bolts of this is going to be covered in several videos after this that I'm working on. If you like this video or have any questions or tips to make it better, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and hit that subscribe button right there if you like what you see so far. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.